Hello, and thank you for joining us here on Westferry Times. I'm your host, Emily. Today, we're going to dive deep into a topic that, well, it feels like it's everywhere, doesn't it? From Parliament down to, chats with friends, populism in the UK. We've got a fair bit of material here, articles, research notes, and we really want to try and understand what's going on beneath the headlines. So, the big question, I suppose, is this. Is the UK genuinely in the grip of a populist wave, or is it maybe just the latest media cycle making noise? To help us unpack all of this, we're joined by Dr. Tom Wallace. He's a political sociologist, and his focus is very much on extremism and, crucially, populist rhetoric. He's someone who's actually spent time, let's say, engaging with those online comment sections, so he's seen the sharp end of it. Welcome.
Thank you. It's great to be here. And yes, those comment sections, they're certainly an experience, a unique window, perhaps.
Right. Okay, so let's get straight to it then. Populism. We hear the word thrown around constantly. Fundamentally, what are we talking about?
Well, at its absolute core, populism is really a political style, or maybe an approach. It basically pits the people, usually portrayed as virtuous and authentic, against the elites. These elites are often painted as corrupt, out of touch, maybe even treacherous. So it's inherently anti-establishment.
Okay, anti-establishment. But crucially, it's not just a far-right thing, because I think that's often how it's presented.
Exactly. That's probably the most common misconception, actually. Populism itself is more like a frame. It can be used by the left or the right. Think about someone like Jeremy Corbyn on the left, focusing on economic elites, versus, say, Nigel Farage on the right, often targeting political or cultural elites.
Ah, okay, so the target of the us versus them defines its flavor, left or right.
Precisely. Who gets identified as the enemy, as the
Yeah.
elite, is what gives it its ideological slant. And it often works by simplifying really complex problems, doesn't it? Boiling things down to these clear good versus evil narratives. It plays on resentment, maybe a feeling of being left behind.
And offers seemingly simple fixes, like the take back control slogan. That felt very powerful.
Absolutely. That slogan didn't just speak to sovereignty. It tapped right into a deeper feeling of powerlessness,
Yeah.
of decisions being made elsewhere by people who didn't understand or care.
So looking at the UK context, when did this start to, well, bubble up more noticeably? Was there a trigger point?
A lot of analysis points back to the 2008 financial crash. That really did a number on public trust in, well, banks, politicians, the establishment generally.
White trust eroded.
Massively.
Yeah.
And you layer on top of that the years of austerity measures, which hit some communities much harder than others.
Creating more division, more resentment, perhaps?
Yes, exactly. And then came Brexit, which became this huge focal point. Plus, the ongoing sort of culture war debates, all these things acted like waves, chipping away at the political center ground.
Okay, let's talk about Brexit because it does feel absolutely central to this story in the UK. Was that the moment populism took over?
It was definitely a watershed moment, a huge catalyst, no doubt. But I'd argue it was more an expression of frustrations that had been building for a long, long time.
So not the origin, but maybe the point where it all sort of coalesced.
I think that's a good way to put it.
Yeah.
All these underlying issues, regional inequalities, deep questions about national identity, a feeling that democracy wasn't really working for ordinary people. They all kind of converged in that vote.
And the language used during the campaign, you mentioned take back control, that was textbook populism.
Absolutely textbook. It perfectly framed the EU as this distant, unaccountable elite, you see,
Yeah.
and positioned the people as needing to reclaim their power from those who'd supposedly betrayed them. Very effective narrative.
And around this time, or certainly in its wake, we saw shifts in the political landscape, newer parties emerging, like Reform UK.
Yes, Reform UK is a very clear example of a party seeking to harness that populist energy, that anti-establishment feeling.
But it wasn't just new parties, was it? Did established parties also shift their language?
Oh, definitely. You saw and still see mainstream politicians adapting their rhetoric. More direct appeals to ordinary working people, more criticism of, say, London elites or the mainstream media. It became part of the toolkit across the board to some extent.
Okay. Now, I want to shift focus slightly to the far right specifically. There's a lot of concern about its resurgence. What does that actually look like today in the UK? Is it different from the past?
It is different. Significantly different, I'd say. The resurgence we're seeing now is it's much less about the old style of organization. Less boots on the street, fewer visible marches compared to, say, the 70s or 80s.
So what's replaced that?
It's heavily digital. We're talking about influence spread through things like encrypted Telegram channels, viral TikToks, online influencers who build quite large followings. They often use coded language, memes, humor. It operates in online spaces, often quite subtly.
So less skinheads marching, more memes and live streams. Is that fair?
That captures the shift quite well, yes. The aesthetics, the tactics, they've evolved. It often feels younger, more plugged into online culture.
Then does that make it more dangerous or less?
Arguably, in some ways, more insidious,
Hmm.
because it can spread rapidly, almost under the radar for people who aren't in those online circles. It normalizes certain ideas without necessarily having a visible, physical presence everywhere.
And these aren't just UK-based phenomena, right? There are global links.
Oh, absolutely. It's very interconnected. UK actors often pick up on and amplify culture war narratives that might originate in the US, for example. There's a lot of cross-pollination of ideas and tactics online.
So is this online activity actually translating into real political power? Are they winning elections?
Not usually through direct electoral victories, at least not significantly for explicitly far-right parties in the UK system currently.
Yeah.
But that's not the main way their influence is felt.
How has it felt then?
It's more about shifting the boundaries of acceptable debate, what's known as the Overton window.
Ah, yes. The range of ideas the public is willing to consider.
Exactly. By constantly pushing controversial or extreme viewpoints online, even if only in niche spaces initially, they can gradually pull the entire spectrum of debate in their direction. Ideas that were once considered unthinkable start to seem less extreme.
And that then gets reflected in mainstream politics?
It can, yes. You see politicians across the wider spectrum start to address topics or use language they might have avoided before, partly in response to the perceived pressure from these online currents. It influences the wider discourse.
Which brings us neatly to the media's role in all this. Big question. Is the media fueling populism or is it, trying to hold it accountable? Or both?
It's definitely complex. I'd say it's often both, sometimes unintentionally. Traditional media can end up amplifying populist voices.
Why would they do that?
Well, sometimes it's presented as balance, giving both sides an airing. Other times, let's be honest, conflict and controversy drive engagement, clicks, ratings. Populist rhetoric is often provocative.
But they also debunk things, provide context.
They certainly can. And quality journalism absolutely does that.
I don't
It's
know.
challenging, and sometimes debunking can even inadvertently give more airtime to the original claim. It's a tricky line to walk.
And then there's social media. You described the far right's use of it. How does it function more broadly in relation to populism?
Social media often gets called the Wild West, and there's some truth to that. The algorithms that run these platforms are generally designed for one thing: keeping your attention.
Right. Engagement.
And what drives engagement? Often, it's strong emotion, outrage, fear, anger. These things travel fast online.
Which suits populist messaging.
Perfectly. Simple, emotional, often divisive messages tend to perform really well in that environment. Nuanced, complex arguments struggle to cut through the noise.
So media isn't neutral here. Both traditional and social actively shape the conversation.
Far from neutral. Media actively frames issues. Think of how immigration is discussed, or crime, or economic problems. Populists are often very skilled at understanding and exploiting these existing media frames.
And sometimes, presumably, some outlets are more actively promoting populist views.
Yes, you certainly see media outlets that align themselves quite closely with populist narratives and actively push those perspectives. It's not just passive amplification in those cases.
Okay, so bringing this all together, the core question we started with, is this wave of populism, this concern about the far right's influence, is it all just media hype, or is there a genuine significant threat here?
I think the honest answer is it's a bit of both, but the emphasis should probably be on the genuine influence.
How so?
Well, some headlines might definitely overstate, say, the actual size of organized far-right groups. The numbers might not be huge in terms of active membership.
Okay, so maybe not a mass movement in that sense.
Perhaps not. But the primary issue isn't just about counting heads. It's about the influence these ideas and narratives are having on the broader political climate.
So even without a huge populist party in power, the ideas themselves are shifting things.
Precisely. It's less about direct electoral power, although that can happen, and more about the power of the discourse itself. Populist narratives, populist ways of framing problems are increasingly shaping mainstream debate.
And you see that when mainstream parties adopt similar language.
Exactly. When established parties start talking tough on immigration in a certain way, or criticizing elites, or using that us versus them rhetoric often defensively to stop voters drifting away, that's populism embedding itself. It becomes part of the political DNA almost.
So the argument is we're kind of already living in a political environment that's been significantly reshaped by populism, whether we always label it that way or not.
I think that's increasingly the case, yes. It's become quite deeply embedded. But, and this is important, recognizing that, seeing how it works, understanding its presence, that's the absolutely crucial first step
The first step towards what?
towards being able to actually challenge it, to push back against those simplified narratives, and to demand, more nuanced and constructive political conversations.
That's a really powerful point to end on. Thank you so much. This has been, well, rich, complex, maybe a bit sobering, but incredibly insightful.
It's been my pleasure. It's vital we have these kinds of nuanced discussions, isn't it?
Yeah,
Especially now.
absolutely. And thank you, our listeners, for joining us for this deep dive here on Westferry Times. Our whole aim is to provide this kind of nuanced understanding. If you found this discussion valuable, please do like it, share it with someone who might be interested, and of course, subscribe to Westferry Times for more. Perhaps the thought to leave you with is this. As populist language does become more common, more mainstream, how do you ensure that critical thinking, that nuance, doesn't get drowned out? Thank you for watching Westferry Times. We'll see you next time.